I flew to Florida without warning and found my son dying alone in the intensive care unit. My daughter-in-law was celebrating on a yacht, so I froze all her accounts. An hour later, she lost her mind. The call to end my final mission came faster than I expected. One moment. I was reviewing the last security report in the operations room overseas. The next, I was packing my duffel bag. 40 years in uniform had taught me to move quickly, but this felt different. I wasn't just leaving a base. I was leaving the life I'd built to protect my country, in my jacket pocket. The weight of my father's pocket watch pressed against me. He'd given it to me before my first deployment, telling me, "Always come home." I had, time and again. But this return wasn't planned. I hadn't told anyone, not even my son. The overnight flight to Miami was a blur of engine hum and restless thoughts. I stared out the window at the thin line of dawn stretching across the Atlantic. Wondering if Daniel would be at work or still asleep when I knocked on his door, I pictured his smile. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. And it was enough to carry me through the turbulence. By the time I landed, the Florida heat wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. The taxi driver loaded my duffel without a word. "Naples," I told him. Giving Daniel's address as we pulled onto the highway. The palm trees swaying in the humid air. I tried to ignore the tightness in my chest. We hadn't spoken much lately, my schedule. His life. But I'd always believed we could pick up where we left off. The cab turned into his street. And something in me shifted. The grass in front of his house was overgrown. The mailbox stuffed with envelopes. Curtains were drawn tight against the sun. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a place abandoned. I climbed out, the heat biting at my neck, and was about to knock when a familiar voice called from across the street. Mrs. Turner, Daniel's neighbor since he bought the place, stood with a watering can in hand. Her face pale. "Maricela," she said, hurrying over. "You don't know what." My voice was steady, but my fingers tightened around the watch. "Daniel's been in the ICU for 2 weeks. They took him by ambulance in the middle of the night. Anne Brianna," she hesitated, glancing away. "She's been on a yacht in the Keys. Been posting pictures all over Facebook." The air seemed to thicken around me as I stood there. The words settling like lead in my chest. I don't remember the drive to Naples General. One moment, I was standing in Daniel's yard. The next, I was pushing through the hospital's glass doors. My heartbeat pounding in my ears. The air inside was sharp with disinfectant. The kind that clings to your clothes long after you've left. At the reception desk, I gave my name and his. The nurse's eyes flickered with recognition. And she directed me to the ICU, 5th floor, room 512. I took the elevator up, gripping my father's pocket watch so hard the metal dug into my palm. The hallway was quiet, except for the steady, mechanical beeping of monitors. When I stepped into Daniel's room, the sound was louder. Inescapable. My son lay on the bed, his skin pale, his frame shrunken beneath the hospital gown. Tubes and wires traced over him like a cruel map. A man in a white coat turned from the monitor. "I'm Dr. Julian Cross," he said, his voice low but firm. "Your son has advanced gastric cancer. Terminal. If we'd caught it earlier, there might have been more time. He's been here 2 weeks. No visitors." The words felt unreal, as if they belonged to someone else's life. I moved closer, my fingers brushing the back of his hand. His skin was cold, the veins fragile under my touch. His eyelids fluttered. Slowly, they opened, and I saw the same hazel eyes I'd watched light up when he was a boy on the baseball field. "I love you, Mom," he whispered, his voice faint his breath before I could answer. The monitor's steady beeping turned into one long piercing tone. Nurses rushed in, and Dr. Cross urged me into the hall. I stood frozen, hearing the flurry of commands. The shuffle of feet. The thud of hands against his chest. Minutes later, the door opened. The doctor stepped out. His expression, heavy. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." The watch in my hand felt heavier than it ever had. And all I could think was that I had come home too late. I drove back to Daniel's house with the hospital's smell still clinging to me. The keys felt foreign in my hand as I stepped onto the porch. When I pushed the door open, a stale wave of air hit me. The kind that settles in when no one has cared for a place in weeks. The living room was dim. Curtains pulled tight. Empty glasses sat on the coffee table, a thin layer of dust coating their rims. In the kitchen, takeout containers and unwashed dishes were stacked haphazardly in the sink. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sign of life on the counter. A pile of unopened mail leaned against the wall. I tore through the envelope's utility shut-off warnings, overdue credit card statements, late mortgage notices. My chest tightened as I flipped through them. Daniel had never been careless with money. I moved into his small office, the chair slightly askew as if someone had left in a hurry. Papers littered the desk, some crumpled, others folded neatly. Among them, I found a thick stack of receipts. The first was for a yacht rental in Key West, $150,000, dated the same week Daniel had been admitted to the ICU. Another from Cartier in Miami showed nearly $200,000 for jewelry. There were dinners at oceanfront resorts, luxury clothing boutiques, all charged to Daniel's credit card. The dates lined up too neatly with the days I knew he had been lying in that hospital bed. I sat down hard in the desk chair, the receipts trembling in my hands. Brianna's face filled my mind, the smile she'd worn in those social media posts Mrs. Turner had described. I had trusted her to stand beside my son, to care for him when I couldn't be there. Instead, she'd been draining his accounts while he fought for his life alone. I pressed the receipts into a neat stack, each one a quiet accusation, and knew this was only the beginning of what I was going to find. I set the receipts down on the coffee table, my fingers curling around my phone. Her number was still saved, though I hadn't used it in months. For a moment, I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering, the weight of what I'd just discovered pushing me forward. The call connected almost instantly. Brianna's face appeared, framed by the blinding white of a yacht deck. Music thumped in the background, mingled with bursts of laughter. She was holding a stemmed glass, a bright orange drink sloshing against the rim. Behind her, people in swimwear danced and shouted over the wind. "Well, look who finally decided to call," she said, smiling like we were old friends catching up. "Daniel's gone," I said flatly, my voice steadier than I expected. Her smile faltered for a heartbeat. Then she shrugged, taking a slow sip. "It was inevitable. You know he'd been sick for a while. Nothing anyone could do." I felt the air tighten in my lungs. But I didn't let it show. And the charges on his card, the yacht rentals, the jewelry. Her laugh was short, careless. "I'm his wife. What's his is mine. That's how marriage works. Maricela." The ease with which she said it was almost more shocking than the words themselves. She didn't even try to pretend remorse. I studied her face for a long second, memorizing every detail. The designer sunglasses, the shimmer of gold hoops in her ears, the wind tangling her perfectly styled hair. "Enjoy the view," I said quietly. She tilted her head, as if she'd heard a compliment. "Oh, I will." "That," I said, leaning forward so my face filled the screen. "Was your last party on my dime?" I ended the call before she could respond, the image of her frozen mid-smirk lingering on the black screen. Setting the phone down, I reached for my father's pocket watch, the cool metal steadying me. It was time to make sure she never touched another cent of what Daniel left behind. By the next morning, I was on the road to Tampa with a folder full of receipts in the passenger seat, and Daniel's notarized power of attorney tucked safely inside my bag. The miles blurred past, the steady hum of the highway matching the rhythm of my resolve. I had one person in mind who could make this happen without delay. Javier Ortiz had been my commanding officer once, and later, a trusted friend. After his retirement, he moved into military financial administration, the kind of position where phone calls got answered and paperwork moved fast. When I walked into his office, the smell of old wood and fresh coffee greeted me before his warm smile did. "Maricela," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I haven't seen you in years, but I can tell this isn't just a social visit." I set the folder on his desk and opened it to the first yacht receipt. These were charged to Daniel's accounts while he was in the ICU. And here's the power of attorney he signed before my last deployment. I need everything frozen. Every account. Every card today. Javier flipped through the papers, his brow tightening with each page. You don't have to explain. Let's get to work. For the next 40 minutes. The room was filled with the tapping of keys and the shuffle of documents. He made call after call, confirming cancellations and holds. I watched each step like I was tracking an operation in the field. Finally, Javier slid a printout across the desk. All accounts frozen, linked cards canceled, remaining balances transferred to the holding account in your name. I exhaled slowly, the first real breath I'd taken since Daniel's hospital room. Thank you, Javier. Don't thank me yet, he said with a small, knowing look. She's going to come at you hard. He was right. Before I even left the parking lot, my phone lit up with Brianna's name. The first few voicemails were full of curses and threats. By the third, her tone had shifted. Her voice softer. Almost pleading. Maricela, please, I just need access to cover some expenses. We can work this out. Not once did she say Daniel's name. I let the phone ring. The vibrations against my palm a reminder that this was only the first step. The real fight was still ahead. Back at Daniel's house, I went straight to the study. The room smelled faintly of old paper and dust. The blinds half closed against the afternoon sun. His desk was cluttered, but organized in its own way. Neat stacks of documents, a few opened envelopes, and pens lined up in a coffee mug. I started with the top drawer, sifting through folders of insurance papers and tax forms. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of manuals, I found a small leather-bound notebook, the kind Daniel used to keep for jotting reminders. The cover was worn at the edges, the spine creased from use. I sat at his desk and opened it. The first few pages were lists of household chores and grocery items. But then the entries changed. Each line carried a date, an amount, and a short note in his careful handwriting. March 8th, $3,000 for Brianna's medicine. April 12th, $5,500 for roof repairs. May 3rd, $7,000 for car payment. I flipped through page after page, my stomach tightening. The amounts grew larger over time, each with some justification attached, all for Brianna. I reached for my bag and pulled out the bank statements I'd collected from the mail pile. Cross-checking each entry with the statements, the truth came fast and cold. The March 8th medicine matched a charge for a high-end spa in Palm Beach. The roof repairs lined up with a payment to a luxury boutique. The car payment was the exact amount of a down payment on a new designer watch. I leaned back, gripping the notebook as though it might burn me. Daniel had trusted her completely. And she had taken every ounce of that trust to feed her vanity, needing more. I picked up Daniel's phone from the evidence bag the hospital had given me. Most of the messages were gone, but in an archived folder, I found one that made my chest tighten. It was from Brianna to a friend. Might as well enjoy his money. He won't last long. I closed the phone slowly, my hand trembling not from shock, but from a steady simmering resolve. This wasn't just theft. This was cruelty documented in her own words, and I would make sure the world saw it. The courthouse was cold despite the Florida heat outside, its high ceilings amplifying every shuffle of paper and murmur of voices. Armando Ruiz sat beside me at the petitioner's table, his files neatly stacked, his expressions steady. Across the aisle, Brianna adjusted her designer blazer, whispering to her attorney. A man in a slick gray suit when the judge called the session to order. Armando Ruiz. He began with the timeline: Daniel's illness, his admission to the ICU, the absence of visitors. Then came the evidence, the receipts, the bank statements, the messages, on the large screen behind him. Brianna's own words appeared in black and white. Might as well enjoy his money. He won't last long. A ripple went through the courtroom. Armando didn't pause. He played Dr. Julian Cross's recorded testimony. His voice calmed but firm as he stated that, with timely care, Daniel might have lived another 1 to 2 years. Brianna's lawyer stood, his tone smooth but brittle. He spoke of spousal rights and marital property, claiming my actions were nothing more than an attempt to punish a grieving widow. The words slid over me like oil on water. The judge leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the evidence spread across the bench, given the clear documentation of financial misuse, the abandonment of the decedent during critical illness, and the credible medical testimony presented. The court orders all assets of Daniel Dane frozen. Temporary control of the estate will be granted to Maricela Dane. Brianna Cole is prohibited from accessing any property or funds until further order. The sound of the gavel was sharp and final. Brianna shot to her feet. Her face flushed. "You'll regret this, Maricela. You can't do this to me." 2 bailiffs moved in, guiding her toward the exit as she hurled her final glare at me. I sat still, my hands folded, the verdict settling over me like a weight I'd been carrying finally. Set down, but knowing this was not the end of what I had to do. The house felt hollow in the days after the court ruling, its quiet pressing in on me. I spent my mornings at the kitchen table, sorting through the estate, paperwork, deciding what would become of what Daniel left behind. The money wasn't just numbers in an account. It was years of his work, his life reduced to balances and statements. One evening, as the sun cast long streaks of gold across the countertop, I knew I couldn't let it sit untouched. I called a contact at the local hospital and began the process of setting up a non-profit in Daniel's name. The Daniel Fund would provide financial support for cancer patients who had been abandoned by family or left without resources. The paperwork moved faster than I expected, within weeks. The first transfers were in place. On my first visit to the hospital as the fund's founder, I met Gabriel. He was 8 years old, his frame small under the thin hospital blanket, his head covered by a faded baseball cap. The nurse told me he had leukemia and no relatives able to care for him. I pulled a chair to his bedside, introducing myself quietly. His eyes met mine clear, but tired in a way no child should be. "I just want someone to stay," he said, his voice so soft I almost missed it. The words landed deep, stirring something I hadn't let myself feel since Daniel's last breath. I reached for his hand, holding it gently. "I'm here now," I told him that afternoon. I spoke with his doctor about arranging support for his treatments, covering the costs through the fund. I left the hospital with a folder of medical notes and Gabriel's small voice echoing in my mind, knowing this was more than charity. It was the first step toward something I wasn't ready to name yet. When Gabriel moved into the house, the stillness that had lingered since Daniel's passing shifted. His laughter seemed to find its way into every corner, lightening the air in a way I hadn't thought possible. The first weekend, we repainted the spare room together. He picked a bright blue, saying it reminded him of the sky on a clear day. I let him roll the paintbrush clumsily along the walls, leaving streaks and uneven patches I didn't bother to fix. It was his room now, and I wanted him to see his mark on it in the backyard. We turned over a patch of earth and planted tomatoes, basil and marigolds. He crouched in the dirt, hands stained, grinning as though he'd found treasure in each seed. Watching him, I remembered Daniel at the same age, digging holes for the saplings we'd planted together. Evenings became our time. Gabriel would sit at the counter while I cooked, sometimes chopping vegetables with careful concentration, sometimes telling stories about school or the other kids at the hospital. We tried new recipes, his favorites quickly becoming mine. One night, as we stirred sauce for pasta, I caught him humming softly, a tune Daniel used to whistle when he was happy. It was a comfort and an ache all at once. The way Gabriel's presence filled the spaces Daniel had once occupied. Without erasing them, I could feel the past and present intertwining. Not in competition, but in quiet companionship. I tucked him in each night, the blue walls glowing softly in the lamplight, and thought about how love could take on new shapes without losing the old ones. And with each day, it became clearer what I had to do next. The sun was just beginning to lower when Gabriel and I walked down to the shoreline. The sound of the Gulf rolling in steady and calm. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of salt and seagrass. In my hands, I carried a small wooden frame with Daniel's photo inside one from years ago. When his smile could outshine any day, Gabriel held a smooth stone he'd found in the garden, saying it would keep the picture from blowing away. We found a spot where the tide reached far enough to kiss the sand, but not take what was placed there. I set the frame down gently, pressing the base into the soft earth. Gabriel laid the stone beside it, his small fingers brushing the edge of the photo. We stood there for a long while, letting the waves speak for us. I thought about how different this moment was from the one I'd imagined when I first boarded that flight home. How loss had led me to something I didn't know I needed. When the horizon began to glow with streaks of pink and gold, Gabriel slipped his hand into mine. I felt the steady warmth of his grip, the quiet promise that we were building something neither of us would have to leave behind. Turning toward home, I knew the house we would return to was more than walls and windows now. It was a place held together by love, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough.